So October, as Laura mentioned, we have a new theme, love as safety. I have a question that I invite you to think about this morning, and that is, are you a good spotter? Are you a good spotter? And what's a spotter, you might ask? Although Laura, I think, jumped the gun on me and explained that. Well, what's a spotter? Well, if the dog pees on the carpet, you might call him a spotter, right? Oh, come on. All right. That's one kind of spotter. You ever do a surprise party and you designate one person to be the lookout, to keep an eye out the window to see if, to warn everybody when the birthday person's going to come? What's that?
It depends on what kind of party.
We might call that person who's looking out to warn everybody when the birthday person arrives as the spotter. Any of you ever play Where's Waldo with your kids or grandkids? You know, that book where you have to find Waldo with his striped shirts and a busy, busy scene of people and things. And we might say when we're playing Where's Waldo that we're spotters. But the kind of spotter I'm talking about, as Laura explained, is not that kind of spotter. The analogy I wanted to talk about today is in gymnastics or in weightlifting, that person who stands right beside you and carefully watches you to make sure you're safe and don't hurt yourself, and support you as well in that whole process that you're going through. So my title is, The Lord is My Spotter. I shall not want. The Lord is my spotter. I would say Spirit is the ultimate spotter. Yes? Yes. I mean, that presence that is always not only right by our side, but within us, as us, always there. That infinite intelligence that is conscious of everything that we do, say, think, want. That presence that guides us, that is there if we get still enough to hear that voice. That presence that, interestingly enough, if you think about a weightlifter and his spotter or her spotter, they don't overspot. They don't jump in and do it for the person lifting the weights. They only take the weight when the burden becomes too heavy. And so maybe once in a while, for just a time, they take that weight and they set it back on the rack to protect the person. And I think that that analogy is a beautiful one for Spirit, because you know, we're not guaranteed no challenges in this life, right? We're here in Earth School to learn, and we don't learn without being challenged, without going through things that sometimes become a burden. But when it becomes too heavy for us, Spirit's always there. And just like that spotter who wants the weightlifter to struggle a bit because that's how they grow their muscles, I think Spirit knows that working through the challenges with the spotter, with the ultimate Spirit beside us, is what grows our spiritual muscles, what grows us, which makes us strong. And we know that with God, everything works together for our good, everything. And so love is safety. I think that knowing is what we're talking about here. That we may experience loss, we may experience challenges, but ultimately God is good, God is for us, God is with us, God is in us. And so there is an inherent safety in life, even though sometimes it feels a little unsafe. Yes? Yeah. I mentioned this morning as Laura did a beautiful centering prayer for me, that my notes are kind of tiny today, and I may not be able to read them. And she said, in her beautiful, inimitable way, and I got her permission to show it, she said, well, maybe Spirit's calling you to just lean back in the arms of God and let Spirit carry you here, because you may not be able to read your notes. I love that. It was just beautiful. Yeah. I loved what Dr. Arlene told us at the board retreat, too. She used a phrase that I'd never heard before. We give ourselves a faith lift. And no, I'm not lifting. It's not a facelift, it's a faith lift. How do we do that? How do we give ourselves a faith lift? Because again, it's remembering the truths that I spoke about, remembering the truths that Laura spoke about, that God is always there. I would say, I don't know, how do we give ourselves a, I guess I'd ask you that question. How do you give yourself a faith lift? For some of us, it's getting quiet, meditating, remembering that we're not alone, as Bridget so beautifully sang for us. For some of us, it's taking classes. I love teaching classes because it constantly reminds me, and I know our practitioners feel the same way, it constantly reminds me of truth. Seeing a practitioner, reading spiritual literature, I think all of those things help us know that that safety net is always there, that God is good and that we are truly loved and we are truly safe. Now, you remember that question I asked you at the beginning, are you a good spotter? Just as Spirit guides, protects, provides for us, I believe we are called to be one another's spotters. So back to that analogy again. When life gets too heavy for us, that we're to be aware of that. And not like over-spotting, not rescuing, fixing, jumping in completely and doing things. All of us know when we raise children, they need us to be their spotters, right? I mean, what does a parent do? One of the main things we do is keep our children safe, even with pets. I was aware of that this morning. My cat wanted to go out in the backyard so bad. And I just had to say, honey, I don't have time to go find you. I'm sorry, I want to keep you safe this morning. I'll let you out when I get back. I divert. What's the word? Divert. I divert a little bit. So we're called to just be aware. Like Laura mentioned of our friends in Puerto Rico, we're called to be aware of who needs a leg up once in a while. We've talked about that. Sometimes it's just a smile, a kind word, cooking a meal for somebody. Sometimes it's bigger than that. Listening, yes, listening, biggest gift we can give somebody. This past week at the board meeting, 2 of our board members, Renee and Danama, have been volunteering and involved in an organization called Northwest Seasonal Workers Association, NSWA. And I'm very excited to talk a little bit about this morning. The board has made a decision that we want to develop a relationship with them and talk about a community organization that functions as spotter and an organization that really we feel as a board fits our mission statement. When we talk about helping make a world that works for everybody, these folks have been doing it. We're celebrating our 35th anniversary on October 22nd. NSWA will be celebrating their 41st anniversary here in the Valley. They're entirely volunteer. Nobody gets paid. They don't accept any money strings attached, no government money. And here's their goal. I love the way they word it. To solve poverty at its soul. To build a floor that no one falls through. Isn't that beautiful? They endorse the United Nations Sustainable Development Plan. All 193 countries in the UN signed this, including us. And the goals are things like this: ending poverty and hunger, ensuring healthy lives, inclusive and equitable education, quality education for everybody, taking urgent action to combat climate change, on and on and on. Conserve and sustainably use our oceans and our earth, resources. They need people. NSWA needs people to volunteer, and they need help with events, and we're going to get involved. This is going to be one of, yeah. And a big thanks to Renee and to Danama for letting us know about this organization. So they have special events coming up, a Halloween party for kids. I don't know if we're a little late to get in on that. One of the things they do during the holidays is they have a wish list of families with children that want to give them gifts and can't afford it this year. And so we provide them. But they don't have a party and give the kids the gifts. You know how sometimes they do? They give the gifts to the families so the families can give them on Christmas morning or whatever they celebrate, Hanukkah, whatever, to the children. It's just wonderful. And then in January, they do a big drive with clothing and warm stuff. And so there's just a lot of neat projects where we can become spotters in our community and help this organization, which has been doing it a long time. A young woman named Caitlin came to our board and did a presentation, amazing presentation. So you'll be hearing more about that from our board coming up. Now, there really isn't any ability to give if there's not somebody willing to receive, right? And research has shown that most of us are more comfortable giving than receiving. More of us are comfortable offering help than asking for help. But if this is a circle, a circulation of good and giving and receiving, if we can't receive, we stop the flow. So while I wanted to talk about spirit as our overall spotter, the ultimate spotter, and I wanted to talk about our being spotters for one another, I also want to talk about when is it time to reach out and ask for a spotter in human form. Because it's really God, isn't it? It's God as each of us willing and wanting to help. One of the books I chose for the book of the month is the book that Laura and Relaine have been doing a book study on, and I understand it's just wonderful. And the book I know is wonderful. It's called The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. Many of you have seen her TED Talks. She is amazing. And I just thought this was very appropriate. The other book I've chosen is called Undefended Love, and we'll talk more about that later in the month. But they both really dovetail nicely with this theme of love as safety. So Brené says in the book, we need to let go of the myth of self-sufficiency. I think especially here in the West, maybe even more than the East, we're into that, somehow this rugged individualism. And nothing wrong with being strong and being able to do things for yourself, but it's a myth that we are self-sufficient or need to be. She says, again, many of us are willing to extend a helping hand, but reluctant to reach out for help when we need it ourselves. It's as if we've divided the world into those who offer help and those who need help. The truth is, we're each both. So until we can receive with an open heart, really, we can't give with an open heart. Because if we're placing judgments on the need to receive, we're placing judgments on the people who we're giving to. Yes? This makes sense to me, whether it's conscious or unconscious. Brené Brown has researched shame, which is different from guilt, because guilt is when I feel bad about something I did, and guilt can actually have a positive motivating effect. If I've really made a mistake, and I feel guilty because I just did something wrong, I can decide to do it differently. It can motivate me to change. Shame really has no positive effect that we can think of, because shame is when I feel like not I did something bad, but I am bad. And gosh darn it, if we're all incarnations of that one love, that one life, that one aspect of infinite intelligence and peace, we're not bad. We may do silly things or even dumb things sometimes, I know I do, but it doesn't mean I'm bad and I need to be ashamed. So Brené says shame grows out of control. Shame grows out of control with 3 ingredients: secrecy, silence, and judgment. So if I feel bad about something and I keep it secret, I don't talk about it, I remain silent about it, and I'm judging myself all the while, shame grows like a weed. So the idea is to reach out to somebody and share. And she talks about when you share your innermost feelings and you become vulnerable, love is safety. It requires us to be vulnerable, because if we don't let people in, we can't really feel connected. But she talks about choosing somebody who's earned the right to hear your story. Somebody that you know you can trust. Somebody who will listen carefully, not judge, not advise, not take over. Makes sense, huh? She also talks about the difference between fitting in and belonging. So fitting in is when she says we can act like a chameleon. We can show certain colors in certain environments or certain opinions in certain environments when we know it's going to be accepted, and we can change to fit the circumstances so we get approval. Belonging is when we can bravely, courageously, sweetly be who we're here to be, and just trust that we will be understood and supported. Maybe not everybody will like us, but we will belong to our tribe. So Brené tells a story in here that I wanted to share with you. I'll be reading parts of it. I love her, and those of you who have seen her know this about her, because she does share in a vulnerable way about herself. She's a social worker, she's a professor in Texas at the university level, but she does share very intimately. So in 2008, she was invited to speak at a conference called the Up Experience, and she was very excited about it, because their mission just matched hers. And she said yes, without knowing a whole lot about them. In 2009, as the date came for her to speak, became closer, she went on the website and read the other speakers that were going to be featured. The event was billed as 16 of the world's most exciting thought leaders and speakers, one mind-opening day. And she freaked out. Because she would be sharing the stage with the likes of Robert Ballard, the archaeological oceanographer who located the Titanic, Gavin Newsom, the mayor of San Francisco, Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist who hosts NOVA and runs the Hayden Planetarium, and David Floof, the genius behind Obama's presidential campaign. And that's just 4 of the 15, and she was like, oh my gosh. You know, that feeling of, do I belong? What am I gonna say? I'm gonna look stupid. All that stuff came up, and she felt like an imposter. Now, to make matters worse, the audience at this conference were what they call the C-suite. You know what that means? CEOs, CFOs, COOs. What's a COO?
Chief Operating Officer.
There you go. CIO, Internet, all this, okay? And they were each paying $1,000 for the event. No pressure, right? So seconds after she reads the list of speakers, she calls her friend and lists them. And her friend is so sure. It's so funny. Renee takes a deep breath and says, I'm not so sure about this. And her friend says, put your measuring stick away, Renee. And Renee's like, what do you mean? Oh, this is the same thing she teaches, right? I still didn't get it. Well, of course, the friend says to her, you're already thinking about how to make your 20-minute talk super researchy and complicated. And Brene says, I still didn't get it. Of course I'm going to be researchy. Do you see the list of people? They're grown-ups. Jen chuckles. Do you need an age check? Dead silence on the other end. So anyway, she gets support. She reaches out. She asks for a spotter. But then this feeling continues of angst. Usually she can write a talk pretty easily, you know, and 2 weeks before the conference, she still hasn't put this talk together.
Uh-oh.
And her lovely husband checks in with her and says, how's your up talk coming? She bursts into tears. Steve is her husband. It's not coming along. I don't have expletive deleted. I can't do it. I'm going to have to fake a car wreck or something. So Steve sits next to her, grabs her hand. What's going on? This isn't like you. I've never seen you unravel over a talk like this. You do these all the time. She buries her head in her hands and mumbles, I'm blocked. I just can't stop thinking about this horrible experience that happened several years ago. He goes, what experience? I never told you about it. He leaned toward me and waited, and she tells him this story. I bombed a talk 5 years ago. Now, can you imagine this upsetting thing happened and she didn't even tell her husband? For 5 years, she sat on the shame here. Here's what happened. When her first book came out, she was asked to speak at a women's networking lunch. She was very excited, okay, because these were normal people. They were just people. They weren't big CIOs or whatever. She arrives early at this swanky country club where the event was being hosted. She introduces herself to the woman in charge. And after sizing me up for what felt like an eternity, Brene says, she greeted me with a stack of short pronouncements. Hello, you don't look like a researcher. I'm going to introduce you. I need your bio. It was an uptight twist on, nice to meet you too. I handed her my bio, and that was the beginning of the end. She read it for 30 seconds, gasped, turned to me, and peering over her reading glasses, snapped, this says you're a shame researcher. Is that true? All of a sudden, she says, I was 10 years old and in the principal's office. I hung my head and whispered, yes, ma'am, I'm a shame researcher. With her lips pursed, she popped, do you study anything else? I couldn't tell her. Do you? She demanded. Yes, I also study fear and vulnerability. She shrasped, which is like a combo shriek and gasp. I was told that you collected research on how to become more joyful and how to have more connection and meaning in our lives. Got it. She didn't know anything about me. She hadn't seen a TED Talk. She must have heard something from somebody else who failed to mention the nature of her work. Now it made sense. So she tries to explain. I don't really study how to be joyful and have more meaning in our lives. I know a lot about those topics because I study the things that get in the way of joy, meaning, and connection. And without even responding, she walks out of the room. Now, the irony, of course, of a shame researcher standing in a puddle of I'm not good enough. The lady comes back in a few minutes, and here's what she says. Here's how this is going to go. Number one, you're not going to talk about the things that get in the way. You're going to talk about the how-to part. That's what people want to hear. People want how-to. Number two, do not mention the word shame. People will be eating. Number three, people want to be comfortable and joyful. That's all. Keep it joyful and comfortable. Long and short of it, she stands there in total shock. She bumbles her way through the talk, not sharing any of the depth of what she wanted to share because she feels ashamed of what she's doing and they don't want to hear it. It was awful. It bombed. People were bored. Oh my gosh. Now somehow, as she's telling Steve this story, her husband, she feels better. She's finally shared it. She's finally called in her spotter and unloaded this shame that she's been carrying around. And she says to herself, for the first time in 5 years, I realized the country club woman was not out to sabotage my talk. If that were the case, her ridiculous parameters wouldn't have been so devastating to me. Her list was symptomatic of our cultural fears. We don't want to be uncomfortable. We want a quick and dirty how-to list for happiness. I don't fit that bill, okay? And what she realized was she's not a how-to person. She's somebody who gets down and dirty and talks about shame and how we resist it. She talks about shame resistance as one of the things. So she gets inspired. She knows what to say to this up group. She actually shares that story with them. And all goes well. So here is a PhD university professor who, even though she teaches this stuff, failed to call in her spotter when she needed him, and when she did, everything went better.
And if that really interests you, and I've got to interrupt for just a sec, that's actually the chapter that we're going to be reading this coming Sunday. So I strongly encourage you, if you're reading the book, if you were and maybe kind of stepped back,
Book
and would
study.
like to jump back into it, the book study is this coming Sunday.
At 10 o'clock? 9 o'clock at Malello's Coffee Shop. Yeah. Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.
So cultivating self-love and self-acceptance, Brene says, is not optional. You know, it's not something we can look into if and when we have some spare time. These are very, very important things to do. She talks about wholehearted living, pouring ourselves with an open heart and all the enthusiasm for what we're here to do into life. And here's what she says, what she's learned, that we are worthy now, not if, not when. We are worthy of love and belonging now, right this minute, as is. We can only belong when we offer our authentic selves and when we've embraced who we are. So this week, my invitation is threefold. Number one, remember the ultimate spotter spirit. Remember what you need to do to remember that that's the truth, that you are safe, that you are held in love, that everything works together for the good. Where do you need to go? What do you need to do to know that you're spotted and safe? Number two, pay attention to where you're being called to be the spotter for somebody else. Not to jump in and do everything for them, but to offer that little bit of respite from life's burdens, however that may look like. Whether it's here in your own family, in our community, as we'll be doing with the NSWA, or whether it's in the world at large, perhaps sending a check to Puerto Rico, just like we did with the Houston flooding situation. Number three, let's pay attention to our own shame symptoms. When are we deciding to be silent and not share and not reach out and just stew in our own shame? And let's remember to call in a spotter, somebody who's earned the right to hear our story. Because the gifts of imperfection, according to Brene Brown, are courage, compassion, and connection. Courage to be who we are. Compassion for ourselves and for others. And connection. Because when we're truly open-hearted, we're not isolated, we're connected. Whether we're asking for help or lending help, we're connected. I'm going to invite our practitioners and ministers in the room to stand with me in consciousness.